Dr. Indra Khurana is a PhD in biochemistry and has been working on issue of natural resources management, drinking water and sanitation, food security, and rural livelihoods for more than 2 decades. She has authored several papers, reports, and books on drinking water, water quality, water conservation, sanitation, manual scavenging, and menstrual hygiene, and has also written several articles for the print and electronic media.
Thank you, Varun, for this brief introduction, and a big thank you to Dr. Goyal and to Dr. Jyoti Patil for giving me this opportunity to share a presentation on looking at water and health. It's a pleasure for me to be able to contribute to this effort of National Institute of Hydrology. So thank you for that. What I will be presenting today is a kind of overview which will establish the links between water and human health, and also between water and the environment and the current crisis that we are facing in terms of pandemic and climate change. I will not be giving too many statistics because statistics are kind of easy to get from the net. What I am trying to do is look at trying to strengthen the link between water and the impact on human health. So when I say impact of water, I mean impact of lack of water and impact of poor quality water. And as always, I will be concluding, looking at what is the way forward, what is it that we can do so that we can address this crisis that our country faces in terms of water. When we talk of water security, both in terms of water quantity and in terms of water quality. So we all know this phrase that we say that water is life, but I think we need to sometimes just sit back and reflect. When we say water is life, do we really understand what that means? Do we really understand the importance of water if we want to survive and survive in a way with dignity and not just exist but really live in peace and security? So I think water is life is a very powerful statement, and it requires some reflection at how are we treating our life? Are we really concerned about our life? And like we all know, clean water saves lives, but unsafe water causes disease and it also kills. Similarly, access to water promotes the quality of life, but scarcity of water causes disruption. It affects our livelihood, it affects our health, it also affects development at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, village levels, district level, and onward to a national level. And it also affects our psychological. It also affects us psychologically. It also affects this feeling, and you feel at peace and secure, because as we know, in thousands of villages in India, for example, it's a big challenge for the people, especially women, where they are going to get a pot of water to meet the domestic water requirements. It is a challenge for the farmers, both male and female. Okay, where will they get the water for the crops if there is a drought or if there is a unseasonal rainfall? So it is going to affect their livelihoods. So it also affects this whole sense of being at peace and feeling secure. And we also know now that there is increased number of conflicts, which leads to again a sense of insecurity. These conflicts can happen in the between neighbors, between cities, between urban and rural, between villages. Competition over meager resource, and between countries. We have more than 225 rivers are transboundary rivers in the world. So we need to look at this river as a source of peace, not as a source of conflict. So overall, water plays a major role right from immediate survival to broader aspirations that we have of feeling, having good income, having good education, being free from disease, and mentally being at peace. So, water is life is really a very loaded statement. I think we need to then reflect when we look at water is life, that have we secured our life? That is then, the next question that should come in our minds. Have we secured our life? And just one statistic I will share, and that is by the United Nations, which says that water shortages could affect 5 billion people worldwide by 2050. So this is a huge number. And, when there is a water shortage, again, there is tension, there is distress migration. People travel within the country or they will travel, to other countries. And this forced displacement is something which affects both the people back home, the people who are migrating, as well as the country where they have been forced to migrate. Again, if we look at have we secured our life, here is the issue of water quality. And there was a report by the World Bank in 2019, which said that, quality unknown, the invisible water crisis. Because water quality problems are now growing in complexity as prosperity expands and new contaminants emerge. There's also uncertainty about what levels of these new contaminants will be, you can consider as safe, whether they will have an impact on humans or they will have an impact on their ecosystems. And the more complex these contaminants get, the more difficult it is to remove them from the water source. And the report also says that as of now, there is no silver bullet solution to solve these water quality problems. And whenever I speak about water quality problems in India, I make a statement that this is a ticking time bomb for our country, and we really need to be aware of this and look at the kind of implications it will have, not only immediately for people living in this country, but also across generations. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goal, and if you look at the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is around access to safe drinking water and sanitation, if you see there's water at the center and there are several goals which are around that water. So several goals, if we want to achieve, it is going to depend on the availability, accessibility, affordability of good quality water. Say, for example, health, education, resilient infrastructure. We may have, for example, construct water supply infrastructure or a sanitation infrastructure. But if there is no water, then you have your infrastructure in place. One end is the tap and the other end is the water source. But if your water source is dried up, there is going to be no water in the tap. So your infrastructure is not going to be resilient, and it is in the end going to be of little use. Access to water has a big impact on gender equity. It also has an impact on, on various others. I'm looking at peace and justice, which I had also mentioned earlier. And if we talk of justice, there is huge inequality in terms of access to water. So you may have in Delhi itself, there are, within the city itself, there are huge disparities in the amount of water that is available to different classes of people and the amount people pay for this water. And in fact, the poor people often end up paying more for access to water than the rich people. And it also has impact on poverty in various forms, agriculture, hunger, and nutrition. So if we want to achieve our other goals, sustainable development goals, it's critical that we also achieve the sustainable goal number 6, which is around drinking water and sanitation. If you look at India's water scarcity, a couple of years ago, there was this report by the World Resources Institute, which said that 50%, 54% of India faces high to extremely high water stress. And there were projections which said that there would be a 50% gap between demand and supply. So this is a huge gap. I mean, there have been reports by Niti Aayog which said that Delhi would be completely dry by 2020. So that did not happen. So, no part of India will be completely dry, that there is not a single drop of water, but there will be huge disparity between the demand and supply. And we're already seeing this in various parts of the country. And so then we need to reflect that, are we doing enough? We see these statistics, but then we also need to act appropriately to change, to change this gap to one which is more, like we should be 50%, have 50% more water than what is our demand. I just like to highlight some of the implications of water scarcity. And this is a picture of Jhansi station, railway station, when there was a drought. I think it was in 2018. You go to the station, and this is the way the station was. People are, because there was a drought in this Bundelkhand region where Jhansi is situated, and thousands and lakhs of people were migrating away from the Bundelkhand region. They are trying to enter into this train from the windows. There's a jam at the door, and this is the crowd on the station. So sometimes there is migration when people have aspirations, when they want to move out because they want to look at education which is not available, or they want to do something else. That is a aspirational migration. But when you do a distress migration, that is a different situation altogether. There have been examples of from Bundelkhand region, for instance, where because of a lack of drinking water, people have migrated from the region. So you can just imagine how much water a person needs for drinking, and even that water is not available. That is forcing people to leave their villages. This lack of water leads to crop failure, which again then in turn leads to poverty because there is no agriculture to produce. No agriculture produced, so it leads to hunger, which again leads to malnutrition, loss of livelihoods, and a tremendous stress on women. I think the gender implications of on the health of women and the social status of women is something that needs special attention, because they face, first of all, the onus of providing for drinking water, domestic water lies with them. If there is distress migration, either they migrate with their husbands or the male members, or they stay back. In both situations, they are vulnerable to violence and abuse. There have been examples when they go to other people's hand pumps, they have been violated and things like that. So it's a tremendous load on the woman. The women are left behind to look after the elderly. So again, that is something, all tension comes on them. So the gender implications of this is very important. And all of this together collectively has an impact on the health. And in fact, in drought situations, research shows that women, especially Indian women, have this way of, कि पहले the other members should eat and then they will eat. When there is, like a one pot of water, they will see that the thirst of the other members is quenched, and then they will drink. So all this affects their body, every organ of their body. It also results in spontaneous abortion. And it unfortunately also results in if the baby is born in a malnourished condition. So these are all intergenerational implications that this has. If we come to India's water pollution story, and this is, I'm quoting from government data, that with 70% of our surface water resources and a growing percentage of groundwater reserves which are contaminated by biological, toxic, organic, and inorganic pollutants, water pollution is a serious problem in India. And this is based on reports that have come from, different reports that have come from Central Pollution Control Board, Central Groundwater Board, etc. The main causes of pollution are agriculture pollution, pollution due to sewage, industrial pollution, and geogenic contamination. Geogenic contamination is the contamination that exists naturally in the say in the groundwater, for example. Say, for example, arsenic or fluoride, which exists in the naturally within India. And as a result of this pollution, many water resources have been rendered unsafe for human consumption, even for irrigation, and in certain cases, even for industrial needs. So, even industry cannot use this water because of the contaminants that are present. So, in 2019, in a parliament question, this was the data that was provided by the Jal Shakti Ministry, which said that the number of water quality affected habitations in India. So habitations are small, houses within in a village scenario. So you can, I won't go through, but you had like more than 69,000 habitations which were affected either by fluoride, arsenic, iron, salinity, nitrate, heavy metal. And we are not even talking of microbial contamination, we are just talking of these. And if you look at the health implications of this, that is why I have named this slide as water health equal to human health. Arsenic contamination leads to arsenocosis, which are this, if you see these hands and this kind of lesions on the hands, and it can also lead to cancer. The children above are suffering from fluorosis, and fluorosis affects every system in the body. And, it affects the skeletal system, it affects the teeth, so this is the kind of children that who will grow up to be adults, and how will they contribute to nation building? How will they contribute to achieving their own livelihood is a cause of concern. Nitrate is also found naturally. Nitrate comes from the overuse of agricultural chemicals, and which leads to blue baby syndrome, which is it affects the heart. And excess salt in the water leads to kidney stones, which in turn also to hypertension or blood pressure. This was a study done by the Central Pollution Control Board, where they looked at a certain number of rivers, and they found these heavy metals that are written here, like cadmium, chromium, copper, iron, lead, and nickel. And these are the numbers of rivers where these heavy metals were found beyond the permissible levels. And the right column on the health implications informs of the various health implications of these heavy metals on the human body. So ranging from cardiovascular disease to kidney failure, cancer, hypertension, alteration in the genetic makeup, which again is concerning because it will then go on to the next generation. Skin rashes, respiratory disorders, a whole set of diseases because of heavy metals that are found in our rivers. And it's important here to also note that all the rivers have not been studied. So we have so many industries which are putting their pollutants without treatment into the rivers. So the pollution load for this country because of this toxic metals is huge. There was also a study by Indian Council of Medical Research which said that people living along the Ganga and UP, Bihar and West Bengal are more prone to cancer than the rest of India. And this is kind of unfortunate also because we have such India and the rest of the world has, it's such a, the river Ganga is, it's linked to India's tradition, belief, culture, faith, so many things. And we also call it, Ma Ganga, river, our mother. And this is the state of our mother today. A lot of sewage pollution is also entering into the Ganga from various towns and various villages along the Ganga. And all these then have health implications like this National Cancer Registry Program has shown. And what is more concerning is that uranium has also been found in waters in Telangana, Punjab and Haryana. And in Telangana, it has been largely due to mining that is there. And if you look at a Bureau of Indian Standards, uranium is not even there as one of the, they have a list of some 20 plus different quality parameters. Uranium does not even figure there. So it's really something that we need to be aware of so that we become aware, we acknowledge, and then we act appropriately. The idea is not to paint a bad picture. The idea is to kind of realize where we are, and based on that realization and acknowledgement, then we can collectively move forward. Again, this is another slide which looks at water health and human health linkages. If you look at the National Family Health Survey of 1920, so more than half women and children are anemic in this country, which is indeed extremely unfortunate. And this is in spite of so many programs that we have on to address malnutrition. Malnutrition, one is that you're not eating the right things, either in terms of quantity and quality. The other is that if you don't have access to safe water and sanitation, then whatever quality food or nutritious food you eat, it is not going to be absorbed by the body. It is just going to come out like it is. And this, like I mentioned earlier, has an intergenerational impact, because if the mother is anemic, chances are the child will be born anemic. The child will be born with underweight, and mental IQ will not be able. The child will not be able to develop to its full potential. Mentally, the IQ will not be optimal. And then how will this child, cope with the world? How will this child contribute and earn a decent livelihood? So it's got intergenerational contamination. So at one point side, we have this problem of biological contamination. And the other side, we have this problem of chemical contamination that are entering our water sources. And from our water sources, it is entering into our body. We all, again, there is a CPCB study which says that, less than I think 60% of our sewage is treated as of now. So huge amount of the sewage is going untreated into the rivers and water sources, which again cause this microbiological contamination. This was a quote I thought was very interesting, that the health of our water is a principal measure of how we live on the land. So if our water is healthy, then we are healthy. So if our water is unhealthy, we are unhealthy. And obviously, we have not been living the way we should be living. And so it's, I think, time now that we need to rethink and reboot how we are managing our water resources. So it's also important to realize that things are increasingly getting more and more complex, because now we have, for example, climate change is a reality around the world. So when the climate change has an impact on water, for example, we all know that there are changes in the weather and the rainfall pattern. For Delhi, earlier we heard from the IMD that monsoon was going to be at the normal date. Then we heard it is coming 15 days earlier. That date has passed. Then we heard that it's going to be 10 days delayed. Today there is a report which says in Delhi may still have to wait for 5 days. So this, and you cannot blame that we don't have the proper forecasting systems. The point is that the uncertainty because of this climate change. Also, the way the rainfalls, the pattern has changed. We all experience that. We have a lot more rain in a less number of days, so that causes immediate, flooding, waterlogging, and doesn't give time for the water bodies or the soil to absorb the water. We also know that the winters are getting colder and the summers are getting warmer. Right now in Canada and parts of US, Canada is having 50 degrees centigrade temperatures, unimaginable. So climate change is a reality that is going to also affect our water, and it's also going to result in the new diseases and the spread of diseases, because as more areas become warm, the disease, the disease causing microorganisms are now going to travel further uphill, for example, as hills get warmer. And so there are already reports of more malaria coming into the hills where it was not there a few years ago. So there is this huge link between climate change, health, and also water. There's also an increase in the disaster. Again, there is scientific evidence. Increase in the severity of disasters, in the frequency of floods, cyclones, drought. Uh, again, leading to poor water quality, increased poverty, inequality, and then again going through that whole cycle of the implications of around water resources. The other one is something that we are right now very painfully going through, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is amazing how such a tiny virus has literally brought all of us to our knees. And as a result of this virus, hygiene gains a lot more importance and significance, because when we talk about COVID appropriate behavior, one of the major behaviors that we have to adopt is washing our hands frequently and or using sanitizer, preferably washing our hands. So if there is no water or if there is less water, how will we wash our hands, especially people who don't have access to water, be it villages or be it in urban slums and informal settlements. And the other issue which I also spoke about earlier was about malnutrition. So there is evidence to say that if you have good nutrition, you have good levels of immunity. If you don't have good nutrition, you don't have good levels of immunity, and then you are more susceptible and prone to disease. So boosting immunity was another factor that was suggested for, tackling the COVID-19 infection. And if you don't have nutrition, so all these things are kind of linked, and it's important that we take cognizance so that we can take appropriate action. We also need to realize that destroying nature affects our health, and water is a part of natural resources. If the ecology is healthy, then humans are healthy. And the example is this COVID-19 virus, which is a zoonotic virus, which means that it has transferred from animals to humans. And 75% of the new infectious diseases are caused by the zoonotic viruses. That means they have transferred from animals to human beings. And this has largely been because we have destroyed the natural habitation, mainly through deforestation. So we need to be very careful when we think of destroying forests for development purposes, because one, it will have an impact on the water resources. In fact, people say that forests are the mother of a forest is a mother of water. So that's one. And the second is it will also give rise to it can give rise to new emerging diseases to which our body has not been exposed earlier. So like I said, we need to just look at how these all have one after another impacts, and we need to, at one point of time, while we may act locally, we need to get a picture at the broad picture so that we understand the implications of whatever action that we are taking. And we need to realize that development, the impact of development is not a single layer, it's multi-layered. And the more faster we understand, the more faster we will be cautious in what development we do and how we can take corrective and preventive action. Yeah, so this is again, sometimes I feel that water is also a victim of development because if you see the status of River Ganga, for example, we've got so many dams on that river, and that has affected the flow of the water. And so because the flow is affected, the quality cannot be maintained. We are dumping in a lot of pollutants into the Ganga. And so we need to be careful that we don't make water a victim of development, because it is a source of our life and life of the planet. So coming to the last part of the presentation, and that is, can we achieve water security? So like I said, the first step is to understand that we are facing challenges. And the second is to understand that, yes, there are things that we can do to address these challenges. But we need to ask ourselves another question with this, that are we willing and are we ready to get involved? If we want to change the scenario and we want to become a water secure nation. It is impossible for any government in any country, no matter what the resources, to handle this challenge by themselves, simply because also because of the scale of the issue, because of the varied use of this limited resource, and also because we people also use water in different forms. So if you're using something, we need to nurture it, we need to take care of it, and we need to work collectively so that we make ourselves and the future of our children secure. This was another very good quote which I found, and I thought that it's worth sharing, that we need to respect and conserve water. And this was actually what one of the traditions of our rich traditions of our country was, that we had a lot of respect for nature and for our water resources. And this is from the people of Liberia, who say, it's an indigenous people, that when you see clouds gather, prepare to catch rainwater. So this is something that we need to do in this country. There are examples. There are thousands of examples in rural areas and also in urban areas where communities and organizations and local governments are capturing the rain where it falls. They are using it either to meet needs directly. Say, for example, in Northeast India, there's been a tradition of collecting the rainwater in tanks and then using that water directly for the use, or you use it to recharge your water, groundwater, your wells or your tanks or other traditional water harvesting systems that are there. So one is to augment whatever we must consider, especially a groundwater as a kind of a bank, which we can't just use it just to withdraw. We also need to replenish this bank. And it's a very important bank for us because more than 80% of our rural drinking water supply currently depends on groundwater. A huge proportion of our irrigation depends on groundwater. So it's like your financial bank. You can't just put in 100 rupees and keep withdrawing 1,000 rupees. That's impossible. So when you withdraw 10 rupees, we put in 10 rupees more. So same thing we need to do with water. We need to minimize the use. Can we minimize the use when we wash our cars? Can we minimize the use for agriculture? We must turn right from turning off our taps to minimizing the use of water that we do for various purposes. There are several industries which have also reduced their water footprint. On one hand, they capture the rain, and on the other, they are shifting to technologies which are using less water. We also must focus on preventing pollution rather than first polluting and then looking at ways to removing that pollution. Let us look at ways that we do not pollute our water resources and also see how we can recycle water. For example, partially treated water is used for irrigating parks and other things in urban areas. In rural villages, people use their kitchen water for their watering their. They use the kitchen gardens which they grow. So let us see how we can recycle the water and reuse it several times. These are just some examples of decentralized and ecologically sound water conservation methods. We need to understand that India is a ecologically very diverse country, and based on this geological diversity, our cultures had developed around this diversity. So it was around the geology, the rainfall, the terrain, the weather. That is why I say people in the Rajasthan desert can live with much less quantity of water than say people living in which has the maximum rainfall in India, which is Mawsumram in Meghalaya. So we developed our culture and our tradition, our agricultural practices, and the way we conserved water through looking at our local, the local ecology. So these are examples from Rajasthan, from Madhya Pradesh, and from Assam in the Northeast. So people are taking efforts to conserve water so that they augment their water resources, and then once the monsoon is over, they still have water to meet their various needs. The one on the river kind of thing on the top right corner, that is in Rajasthan, and that is actually a revival of a river. So Rajasthan has, in Rajasthan, 8 rivers have been revived through community efforts of water harvesting and conservation, where nalas which had water in monsoon have now become actually perennial rivers, and anybody who's interested could go and have a look at those rivers. These are examples then from other parts of the country. They're examples from tribal district of Nandurbar, where those women and men are working on the hill slopes. The one in the middle is revival of a river, Agarni River in Maharashtra. The example on the right is from Kerala. The ones below are from Bundelkhand and Madhya Pradesh. And it's not that it is only in our country. There was this tradition and continues to be so in other countries as well. And these are both from developing countries as well as developed countries. So you have rainwater conservation from Germany, Japan, Singapore, Australia, China, Bangladesh, Nepal, many countries across all the different continents of this world. So if we want to go from scarcity, if we want to move towards abundance, it's very important to go local, to look at local water security. Because if we look at local water security, we have, for example, 600,000 villages in India. So if each village tries to move towards local water security, each village becomes water secure, then we can go from the bottom upwards. If all villages in a district secure, then the district secure, the state secure, and then India secure. So it's also connected to the people's habits, also to what grows there, also to what is the rainfall and the topography. So it's very important that we go local, and we must involve the people in this, because unless people are involved, they must have ownership over this. They will not appreciate what is the water conservation that is happening, or when you participate in such effort, then you have more ownership over it, you are more proud about it, you take more care of it. So it's very important, and it's like I mentioned before, it's impossible for any government to be responsible for making the whole country water secure. We must harvest the range, we must innovate, and we must also scale up the level of artificial recharge. For example, in like say around the Yamuna floodplains now, there is an experiment happening in Delhi that when it rains, through artificial means you recharge the river waterbed, so that over time the groundwater is recharged, and over time you will have a very good balance between the groundwater and the river, and so you will always have water available. Like I mentioned earlier, bring efficiency in use, stretch the water through reuse, and review and redraw what you're doing, because any action that you take it's not a permanent solution. You will have to see if you've done any action, or you've done, you become water secure. Certain changes may take place. You may need to again, revisit and see what else you need to do. So there's a constant need of reviewing and redrawing and improving based on the ground realities. And we must learn to nurture nature. For addressing water quality issues, I think this old proverb, prevention is better than cure, is something that we must focus on. Why pollute a river and then hunt around for ways to remove the pollution through technology? Then, once you have used a filter, what do you do with the pollutant? Where do you dispose of it? So many years pass between, the pollutant in the water and actually taking action. In the meanwhile, people have been affected, livelihoods have been affected. So let us focus on prevention rather than cure. Let us look at a time-bound plan. It's not possible to do it tomorrow. Maybe if it needs 10 years, for example, let us say, okay, in year 1, year 2, year 5, year 10, this is where we want to be. It will take us 10 years. But have a time-bound action plan, and again review and modify as you go along. But think about prevention rather than cure. Separate rivers from sewers. I think this is something which we are struggling with. Though we have sewage treatment plants, many of them are not functional. We don't have, it's impossible right now to cover all the waste that is generated through sewage treatment plants. So we will have to find decentralized sewage treatment approaches, so that the water does not pollute our water bodies. And we must allow flow in rivers for dilution so that if there's any pollution, the pollution is diluted. We must regularly monitor water quality, and it would be good to involve institutions, students, people in monitoring this quality. And there's also a need to inform people and spread water literacy, because very often people are not aware of the consequences of their action. So spreading water literacy is important, and also spreading this literacy in a way that is solution oriented, not just saying, hi, barbad, sab jagah barbadi. There are challenges, but yes, we do have ways in which we can all work together to address these challenges. And since this is an institution of National Institute of Hydrology, I think another thing that is really important is to think out of the box. Like, what are the other solutions that are available? And I feel that youth sometimes come up with such innovative solutions, which, older people like me, we could not even imagine, given the kind of, the digital and the technology advancements that are made. But just keep in mind that it should not be too tech driven, and it should be something that is equitable and that gives power to all people, not only power to a certain class of people. We must question and we must learn, and we must adopt and adapt. What is working in 10 villages in Rajasthan could be lessons for villages elsewhere in similar condition. It doesn't mean that you just cut paste. You'll have to learn the principles from there and then see how you can adapt it in different places. So at the end of, this is the last slide. Yesterday, after the first wave of the pandemic, I did some kind of research, and I was very upset with looking at what was happening to the distress migration and the migrants who were going back. And then I started looking at what paper was, what science was saying about why this pandemic and the importance of nature. And I realized that economy, and I think all of us realize that economies are a product of healthy societies which need clean air, water, and food. So it's not only money that we need a combination of all three. Sometimes we say that we need development to meet our aspirations. But if at the same time the air is not good, the water quality is not good, I have to buy an air purifier, I have to buy a water filter, I have to be careful where I go, I have to this is before the pandemic, I have to wear a mask if I'm going out in the open. So is this really improving my quality of life? So I think these are questions we need to ask ourselves. And nature is going to, and water is going to play a critical role if we want to really be a healthy economy. And people are also going to play a critical role. And nature rejuvenation and equal access for all will enable healthy societies. That and word should be deleted. Will enable healthy societies. So I'll end now, and thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you.